A bitter wind rattled the shutters of Blackthorn Manor, its ancient stones brooding against the autumn night. Within, the faint glow of lamplight flickered in the grand dining hall, where Lady Agatha Blackthorn, recently widowed, lifted a delicate crystal glass to her lips. Moments later, her body convulsed violently, and the glass shattered on the marble floor. Guests gasped, servants screamed, and in the stunned silence her eyes widened in terror before she slumped lifelessly onto the table. Chapter 1. The Widow's Last Toast. The rain had been falling since dusk, a cold and persistent drizzle that turned the gravel drive of Blackthorn Manor into a ribbon of silver under the lamps. The manor itself, rising darkly from the edge of the moor, loomed like some ancient sentinel of secrets. Its tall, mullioned windows reflected fleeting bursts of lightning, and the chimneys poured smoke into the November air. The house carried the aura of a place too long steeped in history, and tonight it would be steeped in tragedy. Inside, the dining hall glowed with an unnatural warmth. Crimson drapes hung heavily against the walls, the oak table stretched like a ship's deck beneath a flotilla of candles, and a dozen place settings gleamed under the light. Lady Agatha Blackthorn presided at the head, her posture regal despite her years. Recently widowed, she had retained her formidable presence, sharp cheekbones, eyes that appraised rather than welcomed, and a voice that cut as cleanly as a knife through silk. Around her sat the invited guests, each chosen with the widow's characteristic deliberation. The butler Graves moved soundlessly among them, pouring wine from a bottle whose label bore the dust of the cellar. At the far end of the table, in a modest seat by his own request, sat Hercule Poirot. His tailored suit was immaculate, his mustache a masterpiece of cultivation, his keen eyes watchful. Though invited under the guise of a social call, he had long since learned that Lady Agatha never summoned company without a hidden purpose. The company was uneasy that night. Clara Blackthorn, Agatha's stepdaughter, toyed with her expressions, hesitations. To him, such details were as bright as footprints in snow. Lady Agatha raised her glass. "To Blackthorn Manor," she declared, her voice resonant in the vaulted hall. "And to the truth, which, though delayed, cannot forever be suppressed." The words hung in the air like a blade unsheathed. Several heads turned sharply. Clara's fork clattered against her plate. Poirot's eyebrows arched, his mustache twitching in curiosity. "A curious toast," he murmured under his breath. Lightning flashed against the tall windows, illuminating the widow's severe profile as she tipped the glass to her lips. The wine glimmered scarlet, rich and heavy. Then, a second later, a terrible sound erupted, the choking gasp of a woman struggling for breath. Lady Agatha's hand convulsed, the glass shattered against the table, and crimson wine spilled like blood across the damask cloth. Her body stiffened, her face contorted in agony. A cry tore from Beatrice's throat as she leapt to her mistress's side. The room dissolved into chaos. Clara shrieked. Sir Edmund rose so abruptly his chair toppled backward. Graves, the butler, froze, horror etched across his usually impassive face. Poirot, already on his feet, moved swiftly to the head of the table. Dr. Pembroke, the family physician seated midway down the table, pushed through the throng, his bag in hand. He bent over Lady Agatha, pressed his stethoscope against her chest, and shook his head grimly. "She has been poisoned," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "There can be no doubt." A stunned silence followed. Rain lashed the windows, and the candles guttered as if the house itself recoiled. Poirot smoothed his cuffs, his expression grave yet alert. "Mes amis," he said softly, but his words carried through the hall. "This is no accident. One amongst you has seen fit to send Lady Agatha to her death." All eyes turned toward him. Clara's face paled to ivory. Edmund's jaw tightened, swept the table. He studied each face in turn, weighing, measuring, noting. To his practiced mind, each glance, each twitch, each breath was a clue. At last he spoke again, his tone formal, his manner resolute. "Mesdames et messieurs, the curtain has risen on a most deadly drama. Hercule Poirot is here, and he will discover the truth." And in the silence that followed, the storm outside raged all the louder, as though applauding the beginning of his hunt. Chapter 2. A House of Secrets. The rain had not abated. If anything, it beat harder against the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, as though determined to drive its way through the ancient glass. The storm muffled the outside world, leaving the guests sealed within the dining hall, bound together by a single terrible fact. Lady Agatha Blackthorn had been poisoned, and her murderer still sat among them. Poirot, ever precise, requested the doors locked. "No one leaves," he declared, his Belgian accent cutting cleanly through the shocked murmurs. "Until this matter is explained, Blackthorn Manor becomes, alas, a prison." The butler Graves, visibly shaken, obeyed without question. The great oak doors closed with a sound like thunder, and the bolts were drawn. The room felt smaller at once, as though the very walls pressed in around them. Poirot turned back to the company. He studied each face as though it were a page in a book. Clara Blackthorn, pale with fury and fear. Sir Edmund Vale, feigning calm, but betraying himself with a restless hand upon his cufflinks. Beatrice Holloway, dabbing at her eyes while sneaking quick, searching glances at the others. Charles Hensley, sweating profusely and clutching his breast pocket as though it contained his soul. And Graves, standing stiff, rigid with the knowledge that suspicion might fall easily upon a servant. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Lady Agatha Blackthorn is no more. She was poisoned, yes, that is certain. The question that remains, who placed the poison in her glass, or upon her plate, and why? These are matters Hercule Poirot will uncover. Dr. Pembroke shifted. "Wish her dead? No, I am no murderer." Poirot inclined his head gravely, then moved on. "Sir Edmund Vale, charming, polished, yet how the roulette wheel. It does not always spin kindly for you, n'est-ce pas? And Lady Agatha refused your proposal of marriage." Edmund's smile was brittle. "You make it sound sordid, monsieur. Yes, I have debts, but I am a gentleman. Murder is beneath me." Poirot's eyes twinkled with irony. "Murder, monsieur, is beneath no one when desperation knocks at the door." He continued, "Mademoiselle Beatrice Holloway, the loyal companion. 20 years you have given to Lady Agatha's service, 20 years in her shadow. Such devotion, it inspires admiration, and perhaps also bitterness." Beatrice dabbed her handkerchief to her eyes. "I was faithful to her. She was cruel at times, yes, but I owed her my position, my livelihood. I never sought her death." Poirot stopped before Charles Hensley, the estate manager. Charles avoided his gaze, fumbling with the ledger at his breast pocket. Poirot's voice softened dangerously. "Monsieur, you keep the accounts. Rumor whispers of missing funds. If Lady Agatha discovered theft, it could mean ruin for you, eh? Charles' voice cracked. I only borrowed, Poirot. Temporary shortages, nothing more. I swear I had no reason to harm her. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then returned to the head of the table where the shattered glass still lay. He raised a finger. And finally the servant, Graves. Faithful butlers have felled their masters before now. Tell me, mon brave, you poured the wine, did you not? Graves' lips trembled. I did, sir, but I swear upon my life I opened the bottle before you all. There was no tampering, no trickery. The wine was pure. Poirot stroked his mustache. Pure, perhaps. But the poison, it did not enter her veins of its own accord. The silence grew heavy. The storm rattled the windows like angry fists. Poirot drew the companion's attention to the faint dusting of powder beneath That is true. I left the room for a moment, but only to fetch more claret. The glass was untouched when I returned. Poirot raised a hand, halting the rising argument. So, already we see. The widow's glass, her plate, they passed through many hands. Too many for comfort. He paced slowly, the candlelight catching the gleam of his patent leather shoes. His mind sifted details, each tiny fact a grain in the sieve of truth. Lady Agatha herself gave us a clue, he murmured, almost to himself. Her toast, to the truth, which cannot forever be suppressed. What truth, mes amis? Whose secret weighed so heavily that it required silencing? Clara shivered. She was going to change her will. I heard her speaking to the solicitor yesterday. Perhaps that was the truth she meant. Edmund's face blanched. Change her will? To exclude you? To exclude all of us, Clara whispered bitterly. She said she intended to leave everything to some benefactor whose name she refused to reveal. She enjoyed her little cruelties. A murmur spread through the room. Edmund clenched his jaw. Beatrice looked stricken. Charles paled further still. Poirot's eyes glittered. Ah, so the motive, it is not lacking. Money, mes amis, is the most faithful of poisons. But remember this, a motive is not proof. We require the method, and already, it is here before us. He gestured to the shattered glass, the powdery residue, the open bottle. The hand that placed the poison is concealed, but it will not remain so. Hercule Poirot has very little patience with concealment. The candle sputtered as a gust of wind rattled the shutters. Poirot straightened, his voice solemn. Tonight, in this house, we are surrounded not only by walls of stone but by walls of secrecy. Each of you harbors resentment, need, or fear. But only one has chosen to act. The murderer sits here, listening to my words, pretending innocence while the truth presses upon them like a weight. He assembled guests. He raised a hand for silence. Mes amis, it is time. Already we know Lady Agatha did not die of chance. She was poisoned, deliberately, carefully. The arsenic, it was present both in her glass and on her plate. This tells us that someone, perhaps fearing uncertainty, took care to ensure her death was beyond doubt. Such thoroughness, such cold resolve. He allowed the words to sink in. Clara's hands gripped her chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. Beatrice Holloway pressed a trembling handkerchief to her lips. Sir Edmund Vale's composure slipped for the briefest of moments, and Charles Hensley tugged nervously at his collar. Poirot walked slowly to the butler, Graves, who stood rigid near the sideboard. "Monsieur Graves, let us begin with you. You who poured the wine, yes? Tell us exactly what you did this evening." Graves's voice quavered despite his attempt at dignity. I brought the bottle from the cellar at Lady Agatha's request. It was sealed, dust upon the cork. I opened it here, before everyone's eyes. I poured for Lady Agatha first, then the rest of the company. That is all." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, I observe your hands tremble even now. You say the bottle was sealed? Entirely? No sign of tampering?" Graves swallowed hard. "None that I could see. It was one of the 23 claret vintages, my lady's favorite. I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I had no hand in this." Poirot gave a small nod, then plucked the bottle delicately from the table. He held it to the candlelight. His sharp eyes detected the faint smear of fingerprints across the glass. With a handkerchief, he traced them carefully. "Curious," he murmured. "Two distinct sets of prints. One is yours, no doubt, Graves. But the other?" He looked around the table. "Which of you handled this bottle before it was opened?" Silence. Then Clara, her voice tense, spoke. "I touched it briefly, earlier in the evening. Lady Agatha asked me to fetch it from the cellar, but I refused. The widow opposed it fiercely. With her gone, who benefits most? Clara, yes, but perhaps you too, n'est-ce pas?" Edmund's face hardened. "You suggest I poisoned her to clear a path for Clara's inheritance? That is absurd. Besides, if Clara is disinherited, as we have just heard, then I gain nothing." Poirot tilted his head. "Unless, monsieur, you did not yet know of the altered will, or unless you feared what truths Lady Agatha might reveal tonight." The gentleman faltered, his eyes darting toward Clara, then back to Poirot. He said no more. Poirot turned, his gaze settling on Beatrice Holloway, who sat rigid, her handkerchief soaked with tears. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, you arranged Lady Agatha's setting, did you not? The plate, the silver, the napkin." "Yes," she whispered. "And when Graves was summoned away, you poured the wine also, did you not?" Beatrice's eyes widened. "Yes, but only because he asked me to hold the glass for a moment. I swear, I added nothing. Nothing." Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes gleamed. "You knew her moods, her habits. You knew precisely how she took her food, her drink. Such knowledge, it gives opportunity. And you were the last person to whom Lady Agatha entrusted her confidence. You spoke with her this very afternoon." Beatrice hesitated. "Yes, she was troubled. She said she had discovered something, a betrayal in the household, but she would not say more." Poirot leaned forward, mustache quivering. "Ah, voilà. The truth which cannot forever be suppressed. Perhaps it was not her will alone, but some treachery uncovered. And if that truth threatened to destroy you, mademoiselle, what then?" Beatrice burst into fresh tears. "I loved her once. I would never, never." Poirot said nothing, only allowed the silence to deepen until her sobs filled the hall. At last he turned to Charles Hensley, the estate manager. Charles had grown pale, sweat beading his forehead. Poirot's eyes flicked to the carved from stone, each concealing thoughts too dangerous to speak. Poirot broke the silence with a low murmur. "It is not only the motives that matter, mes amis. It is the opportunity. And already I see that each of you, Clara, Edmund, Beatrice, Charles, had both motive and opportunity. Even Graves is not free from doubt. Truly it is a feast of suspects laid before Hercule Poirot. He bent once more to examine the broken glass at Lady Agatha's place. Carefully he lifted the stem between thumb and forefinger. The rim was faintly dusted with the same crystalline residue. Poirot held it aloft. "Observe! The poison clings here, visible to the careful eye. And 2 sets of fingerprints on the bottle. 2 hands that touched death before it reached Lady Agatha. Already the noose tightens." His gaze swept across the table. "The murderer sits here. He, or she, listens now to my words. Perhaps they tremble, perhaps they smile. But Hercule Poirot will find them. Of that you may be very certain." The storm outside gave a violent clap of thunder, as though echoing his pronouncement. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Corridors. The storm raged still, as though it would never cease. Lightning forked across the heavens and illuminated the manor's great hall in stark flashes. Poirot, small and composed, stood at the foot of the grand staircase. His eyes gleamed with that peculiar light that came only when his little gray cells began their delicate dance. He spoke quietly to Inspector Morton, who had finally arrived from the nearest village, soaked, disheveled, and more than a little irritated at being dragged out on such a night. "Mon cher Inspecteur," Poirot said, smoothing his mustache with a flourish. "We have here a nest of serpents. Each hisses its innocence, each coils in its corner. Yet one has struck. You will see. Patience, and all will be clear." Poirot's mustache twitched. So, Lady Agatha prepared to expose someone, and she did not live to do so. From the writing slope he uncovered her will, neatly folded but with notes scribbled on a separate sheet. Poirot studied the lines. The handwriting, firm and decisive, had outlined a new codicil. Clara's name was struck through. Beatrice's inheritance was reduced. Charles Hensley's stipend, once generous, was threatened with termination. Sir Edmund's loan, guaranteed by Lady Agatha, was marked for immediate recall. "Tiens," Poirot whispered. Each of them stood to lose. Each of them had reason to silence her before she spoke. He closed the desk softly and turned to leave, but as he did, he noticed the faintest trace upon the doorknob, a greasy smear, barely visible in the candlelight. Poirot leaned closer, inhaling delicately. Not grease, powder. He dabbed it onto a handkerchief and smiled faintly. Arsenic residue. Someone entered here after her death. Someone careless. Downstairs he prowled next into the servants' quarters. Most were shuttered and silent, the staff having been dismissed to their rooms under Graves' stern instructions. But Poirot's ears caught a low murmur behind one door. He paused, listening. "It's ruined now," a voice whispered urgently. "He'll find out. He always does." "Keep quiet," another hissed. "If anyone knew, we'd both hang." Poirot tapped politely upon the door. Silence fell instantly. At length Graves himself opened, his face a mask of rigid calm. Monsieur Poirot, he said with strained civility. These are the maids' quarters. What business? Poirot smiled mildly. 1,000 pardons, my friend. I was merely admiring the fine workmanship of the door. It is very sturdy. He turned away before Graves could answer, but in his mind the words echoed. Hell find out. He always does. A curious remark indeed. Later, Poirot returned to the dining room. Now dark. You. Her shoulders sagged a little, though her eyes remained fierce. She was a tyrant. She destroyed my life. I did wish her dead, but I swear I did not touch her wine. Poirot regarded her in silence for a long moment. Then he bowed slightly. We shall see. As the night deepened, Poirot's investigation carried him to the library. The storm rattled the windows and bookshelves loomed like silent witnesses. There he found Sir Edmund Vale, pouring himself a generous measure of brandy. Ah, Poirot, Edmund said with forced cheer. Care for a drink? Lord knows we need one. Poirot shook his head gently. I prefer the clarity of water. Alcohol. It clouds the little gray cells, monsieur. But perhaps you prefer them clouded, eh? Edmund's face tightened. You think me guilty, but I tell you, Poirot, I had no hand in it. Yes, I quarreled with Lady Agatha. Yes, she threatened to ruin me. But poison? In her own house? Before witnesses? That is not my style. Poirot approached the fireplace, noting the half-burned documents hidden beneath the grate. He drew them out with tongs. Loan notes, bearing Edmund's signature, and Lady Agatha's sharp scrawl, to be settled at once. Poirot held them up. She intended to call in your debts, a motive most pressing. Edmund drained his brandy with a defiant gesture. Perhaps. But if I wanted her dead, it'd have arranged a convenient accident. A fall from a horse, a hunting misfire, not this circus of suspicion. Poirot studied him. The man spoke with conviction. Yet sometimes, Poirot knew, the truth wore the mask of reason. Poirot's final stop was Charles Hensley's office, a cramped room smelling of ink and ledgers. The estate manager sat hunched over his desk, feverishly writing. As Poirot entered, Charles stuffed papers into a drawer. Late for bookkeeping, monsieur, Poirot remarked softly. Unless you are balancing accounts of a more dangerous kind. Charles paled. I was only reviewing records. Lady Agatha accused me of mismanagement. I wished to prove her wrong. Poirot, an opportunity. Yet only one possessed both the heart and the cleverness to act. Soon, mon ami, the truth will emerge, and when it does, it will astonish. Morton snorted. You sound damn sure of yourself, Poirot. But I'll tell you what I see. A house full of liars, all scared stiff. Could be any of them. Poirot smiled faintly, eyes never leaving the storm. Yes, mon cher, it could be any, but it is only one, and Hercule Poirot will unmask them, as surely as the dawn will break, whether the storm wishes it or not. A clap of thunder shook the house and the fire guttered low. Shadows swayed across the walls, stretching long and sinister. Somewhere above, a door creaked softly, though no footstep followed. The manor, ancient and secretive, seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting the revelation that would tear its fabric apart. Chapter 5. Breakfast of Shadows. Morning came slowly to Blackthorn Manor. The storm had abated, but the moor lay sodden and gray, shrouded in mist. Damp seeped into the ancient stones. The corridors seemed colder than ever. In the great dining hall, the fire had been rekindled, Yet even the crackle of logs could not banish the lingering chill left by Lady Agatha's violent death. The table was laid once more, though fewer places were set. Where the widow's seat had stood in stern prominence, only a dark emptiness remained, a cruel void that drew every eye in spite of themselves. Poirot entered with his customary precision, cuffs immaculate, shoes gleaming despite the mud outside. Inspector Morton lumbered behind him, yawning, his hair still damp from an attempt at washing away the night's fatigue. One by one the household appeared. Clara arrived first, pale but resolute, her silk dress simple yet elegant. She refused to look at the empty chair. Behind her came Beatrice, moving stiffly as though a weight had been chained to her heart. Sir Edmund strolled in with exaggerated casualness, offering a too loud good morning that echoed uncomfortably. Charles Hensley followed, his eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. Graves, expressionless as always, supervised the maids, who brought in coffee and eggs. "Sit, mes amis," Poirot urged with courtly grace. "Eat, drink. One must fortify the body, even in times of tragedy." No one had much appetite. Cutlery scraped awkwardly, cups clinked in nervous hands. Outside, crows cawed upon the sodden lawn. Poirot let the silence stretch before speaking. "This breakfast, it is, how shall I say, unusual, no? For the one who always presided, she is no longer with us. A gap in the symmetry. One feels it strongly." Clara flinched at his words. Beatrice dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Poirot leaned forward, folding his hands. "And yet, life insists we continue. That is why Hercule Poirot asks you is rarely so noble. More often it's ugly and costly." Charles swallowed visibly. His hand shook as he reached for his cup. "To truth," he muttered. "May it forgive our mistakes." Poirot's mustache quivered as he absorbed each response. He made no comment, only inclined his head, as though each had revealed far more than they realized. The meal staggered on. Poirot, eating delicately, let conversation unfold. He asked small questions, seemingly trivial yet pointed. "To you, Sir Edmund. You spent much of last evening in the library, did you not?" "Indeed. I sought solace in brandy and books. Is that a crime?" "And you, Monsieur Hensley?" Poirot turned. "Your office was locked, yet I found the drawer most revealing. Tell me, do you always work so late?" Charles stammered. I do what must be done. Estates don't manage themselves." Beatrice dabbed her mouth. "You probe us like insects under glass, Monsieur Poirot. Is this your method?" Poirot's eyes softened. "It is to allow each the chance to reveal what lies in the heart. For the truth, it has a curious way of slipping out when least expected." The tension was broken when a maid stumbled into the hall, breathless, clutching a silver tray. On it lay a folded paper. "Begging pardon, sir," she said to Poirot, "but this was found in the garden, wedged in the ivy near the library window." Poirot took the paper carefully. It was damp but legible. He unfolded it to reveal hurried lines of script. "Meet me by the sundial at midnight. She suspects. We must act before it is too late." Gasps erupted around the table. Poirot raised a hand. Silence, if you please. This note, oui. It is important. But more important still is who dropped it. You see, it was written not yesterday, but earlier. The ink has run from rain, yet the hand. Ah, the hand I recognize. His documents, bits of ash, poison traces. What does it all mean, Poirot? You've enough to confuse a bishop, but where's the proof? Poirot smiled faintly. Patience, mon ami. The breakfast, it told me much. Clara's bitterness, Beatrice's trembling, Edmund's defiance, Hensley's guilt. Each plays their part in this symphony of lies. The note, it is but another instrument. Soon we will hear the melody complete. Morton muttered, I'll be glad when you play the last note. This house gives me the shivers. Poirot's gaze drifted to the window where mist curled across the moor. His voice lowered, almost to himself. Yes, but remember, Morton. The darkest lies are often spoken at breakfast when people believe the night has ended. Yet for us, the night is only beginning. As the clock told noon, Poirot prepared for his next stage. He would not yet confront them with his suspicions. Instead, he would observe, prod, and wait until their own fear loosened tongues and trembling hands. And somewhere in the manor, behind some locked door or whispered conversation, the true killer waited, watching, fearing, ready to strike again if pressed too hard. Poirot smoothed his mustache with deliberate care. Yes, he murmured, the trap is nearly set. One false move and the serpent will show its fangs. The house, heavy with silence, seemed to listen. Chapter 6. The Toast Reconstructed. Afternoon gloom settled heavy upon Blackthorn Manor. The rain had thinned to mist, yet the air clung damp against the stone walls, and the gardens outside lay drowned in gray silence. Within, the household moved uneasily, each member pacing or retreating to solitude, as though isolation might shield them from suspicion. Poirot, however, had no intention of allowing isolation. At precisely 4 o'clock, he summoned them all to the dining hall. The long table was once more laid with crystal and china, though no feast adorned it now. Only the wine bottle, half a vent anew. From a different angle, the truth may slip into the light. A murmur of protest rippled. Clara exclaimed, "This is grotesque. To reenact her death like some stage play. It's indecent." Poirot inclined his head gently. "On the contrary, mademoiselle, it is most decent, for it may bring her justice." Reluctantly they complied. The chairs were resumed, each in its original place. Poirot directed the butler. "Graves, if you will, pour as you did before. The wine. It was you who served it, n'est-ce pas?" Graves' jaw tightened, but he obeyed, filling each glass with a precise hand. Poirot noted the tremor that betrayed his composure. "Now," Poirot continued, "we come to the moment." Lady Agatha raised her glass, and she spoke. "Mademoiselle Clara, you were to her left. What did you do?" Clara's fingers gripped the stem of her glass. She hesitated, voice taut. "I drank, as the others did. Nothing more." Poirot's gaze lingered on her face, then shifted. "Monsieur Hensley." Charlotte's eyes darted nervously. I raised my glass. I hardly touched the wine. I had a headache. A curious malady. That prevents one from drinking, but not from accounting, Poirot murmured, then turned to Beatrice. The companion's voice quavered. I drank, yes. And I smiled, because Lady Agatha wished it so. Bon. And Sir Edmund? I drank heartily, though I confess the toast puzzled me. To truth. What a strange choice for a supper blessing. Poirot's mustache twitched. Indeed. Now, Graves, your roll? I poured as ordered, Graves replied stiffly. I then stepped back to the sideboard. And the good Dr. Pembroke, he examined Lady Agatha at once. But he is absent today. We shall not trouble him further. Poirot lifted the widow's glass, still bearing the faint crack where it had shattered. He held it aloft. Here is the vessel of death. Yet one detail intrigues me. You see, the poison was not evenly mixed. Some remained as residue upon the rim, which means judgment. She threatened exposure. To silence her was to preserve one's secret. The room trembled with tension. Morton stepped forward. So, Poirot, which one was it? Poirot's gaze swept the table slowly, savoring the weight of his silence. Then he said softly, Not yet. The truth, it ripens like fruit. If plucked too early, it is sour. We must let it grow sweeter still. The reconstruction ended, yet its impact lingered. Clara stormed from the hall, declaring she would not endure such insinuations. Edmund followed, muttering about nonsense theater. Beatrice collapsed into a chair, whispering prayers. Charles remained hunched, trembling, as though the noose already tightened around his neck. Graves collected the glasses with mechanical precision, his expression unreadable. Poirot lingered by the fire, lost in thought. Morton approached, exasperated. You're playing with them, Poirot. Why not strike while the iron's hot? Poirot smiled faintly. Because, mon ami, the serpent is still coiled. Strike too soon and it may vanish into the grass. Better to let it slither into the open. Later, Poirot roamed the manor alone. The storm had cleansed the air, but inside the corridors the scent of dread remained. In the library, he studied the window where the secret note had been found. He paced the gravel outside, noting footprints, several overlapping, blurred by rain. Yet one print lingered clear, the impression of a woman's heel, small and elegant, near the sundial. Poirot crouched, fingertips brushing the damp soil. So, someone came indeed. A midnight meeting, planned but interrupted. He pocketed a small scrap of fabric, torn upon the sundial's edge. Black lace, delicate. His mind flashed to Beatrice's mourning veil. Evening drew near. In the drawing room, Poirot gathered the household once more. He spoke lightly, as though about trifles, yet each word was weighted. Lady Agatha, she had secrets. Another kind gathered, invisible yet heavy, thick as the air before lightning. Doors shut earlier than usual that evening, the inhabitants retreating to their chambers as though bricks and oak could shield them from suspicion, or from Poirot's piercing eyes. But Hercule Poirot did not sleep. He remained seated in the drawing room well past midnight, a small lamp glowing beside him, his hands steepled beneath his chin. He looked to the casual eye, a man at rest, but the stillness was a deception. His little gray cells churned ceaselessly, replaying the dinner toast, The movement of hands, the trembling of voices, the faint lace scrap in his pocket. He was listening, too, in that peculiar way he had, not merely with ears, but with instinct. Every creak of stair, every soft pad upon the carpet above told a story. At last, sometime past 1 o'clock, he rose. The house was silent, but Poirot trusted silence no more than he trusted words. With slippered feet he glided into the corridor, his lamp turned low, casting just enough light to see. He moved first toward the library, for it was there Lady Agatha's note had been discovered, and there too the household's nerves still trembled. The door creaked. He entered. The air was cool, touched faintly by the scent of old smoke from the fire that had burned earlier in the evening. Books loomed in orderly ranks. The great window stood pale with moonlight. Poirot's eyes swept the floor. Yes, disturbance again. Not so clear as in the rain-swept garden, but faint impressions upon the rugs suggested someone had lingered here long after the household retired. And then he heard it, a whisper of movement in the hall, the brush of fabric against wall. Poirot extinguished his lamp and flattened himself against the bookcase. The door eased open. A shadow slipped within, cloaked in black. The figure carried no light, but moonbeams caught the faint shimmer of silk. Poirot, yes, but also something deeper. Shame, perhaps, or guilt of another kind. Then what is it you seek so feverishly in the night? Beatrice faltered. Her shoulders sagged, and she whispered, "A letter. Lady Agatha's letter. She told me she had written down everything. Everything about this household, about their lies. She said if anything ever happened to her, the truth would still come to light. But when I went to her chamber after her death, it was gone. And now, it must be hidden here." Poirot's brows lifted. A testament beyond the will, eh? That would explain much. Before Beatrice could reply, a sound shattered the stillness. A sharp crack, like wood against wood. Both turned toward the window. The catch had been forced from outside. A figure loomed in the moonlight, climbing swiftly through. Poirot glimpsed only a flash, a coat, a broad shoulder, a gloved hand, before the intruder lunged. A knife gleamed. "Down!" Poirot barked. He shoved Beatrice aside as the blade slashed through air where she had stood. The attacker cursed, retreating toward the window. Poirot seized the nearest object, a brass paperweight, and hurled it with surprising force. It struck the figure's shoulder. The man stumbled, snarled, then leapt out into the night. Poirot dashed to the window, but by the time he leaned out, the intruder was gone. Only the faint echo of footsteps fading toward the garden remained. Behind him, Beatrice sobbed softly. He meant to kill me, to silence me." Poirot closed the window catch with calm precision. "Indeed, mademoiselle, which means you know something worth killing for." Beatrice pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking. I don't know what she wrote, I swear. But she said it concerned Sir Edmund, and Clara, and Charles. She said one of them had already betrayed her in a way that could never be forgiven." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, now we approach the heart. Merci, mademoiselle. You must rest. But take care. There are eyes in this house that watch every step." He guided her from the library, ensuring with all the venom of the damned. But Hercule Poirot, sitting calm as a judge beside the dwindling fire, allowed himself a small smile. The trap had been set. The serpent had struck. And soon, very soon, the truth would be his. Chapter 8. The Gathering Storm. Dawn crept reluctantly over Blackthorn Manor, painting the moors in bleak tones of ash and pearl. The storm had passed, but its echo remained in the sodden earth, in the dripping gutters, in the air heavy with damp. The household stirred sluggishly, each resident carrying the weight of suspicion like a stone in the breast. The servants moved quietly, whispering in corners, eyes wide. Murder had come into the house, and it had not yet left. Hercule Poirot rose early, immaculate as ever, his mustache perfectly waxed, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the mud outside. He breakfasted lightly, toast, coffee, an orange, and then requested the company of every principal guest in the drawing room by 10 o'clock. Graves, the butler, announced the order gravely, and one by one the suspects arrived, taking seats with the solemnity of mourners awaiting a verdict. Clara Blackthorn entered first, her eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness or tears. She wore mourning black, though Poirot noted the dress had been hastily altered to suit her figure, as though she had been eager to assume the widow's mantle before it fit her. Sir Edmund Vale followed, dapper as ever, but there was a twitch to his mouth, a stiffness in his movements that betrayed unease. Charles Hensley came next, clutching his ledger close as though it might shield him. Beatrice Holloway entered last, pale and shaken from the night's encounter, her eyes darting nervously whenever a floorboard creaked. Poirot stood before the fireplace, hands behind his back, his stance commanding, yet oddly delicate. Mes amis, further. Edmund shifted in his chair. Charles dropped his ledger, fumbling to recover it. Beatrice bowed her head, trembling. Poirot raised a hand for silence. You see, mes amis, the murderer grows desperate. There is a document, a letter, written by Lady Agatha, in which she named the one she most suspected. This letter has not been found. Its absence is telling. Someone fears it. Someone would kill to prevent its discovery. He paused before Beatrice, his gaze softening. Mademoiselle Holloway, you searched for it last night, did you not? Beatrice flinched as all eyes turned to her. Yes, she whispered. She told me it existed. She said it would reveal the truth. But I never found it. Only he came through the window. Poirot nodded gravely. Just so. You are fortunate, mademoiselle, that the knife did not find its mark. But remember, courage, always courage. Fear clouds the mind, and it is clarity we must seek. He straightened, turning his attention back to the assembly. Now, it is time we examine each of you, openly, in the light of day. Each of you had reason to wish Lady Agatha gone. Each of you has secrets. Shall we expose them together? We? Clara stiffened. This is cruel. This is justice, Poirot corrected gently. He began with Charles Hensley, the estate manager. Monsieur, your ledgers, they tell a tale of numbers that do not align. Funds missing, accounts muddled. Did Lady Agatha discover this? Did she threaten exposure? Charles swallowed hard. I was only moving money to cover debts. The harvest failed last year. The tenants needed relief. I borrowed from the trust, yes, but always with the intent to repay. She would not listen. She called it theft. I feared she would ruin me. Poirot inclined his head. A motive indeed. Yet theft breeds fear, not his gaze sweeping them all. So, we have motives aplenty. Theft, debt, hatred, resentment. And we have an unseen hand that strikes in the night. But one thing is clear. The murderer fears discovery, and thus acts rashly. That is their undoing. He clasped his hands together. Therefore, mes amis, I propose a little experiment. Tonight we shall all dine together once more. We shall raise our glasses to Lady Agatha. And perhaps then, in the theater of repetition, the truth shall reveal itself. The room erupted, protests, objections, nervous laughter. Clara shrieked, "You mean to poison us all?" Edmund snarled that it was madness. Charles paled, mumbling about propriety. Beatrice simply wept. Poirot lifted his hand. Calm yourselves. There will be no poison tonight. Not while Hercule Poirot watches. But the murderer, they will be uneasy. They will betray themselves. It is inevitable. His eyes gleamed as the firelight caught them. For murderers, like all liars, cannot act forever, and when the curtain rises tonight, they will stumble, and Poirot will be waiting. That evening, preparations began. The long oak table was laid once more, though this time without Lady Agatha at its head. The servants, grim-faced, moved about under Poirot's instructions. No bottle entered the room without his inspection. No glass was filled without his eye upon it. He was everywhere at once, watchful, relentless. The suspects arrived reluctantly. Clara clung to Edmund's arm, her beauty marred by dread. Edmund himself masked his tension with bluster. Charles fidgeted, wiping sweat from his brow. Beatrice sat silently, pale as death. As the candles were lit and the storm of night gathered beyond the windows once more, Poirot stood at the head of the table. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice low yet firm. "Tonight the truth comes into the open. Eat, drink, speak freely, for I am watching. And the murderer, the murderer shall not of penitence." Clara leaned on Edmund's arm, her beauty sharpened by fear. She looked about as though every shadow held a dagger. Edmund himself projected bravado, his smile too wide, his voice too loud. Charles Hensley clutched his ledger still, though tonight he carried it like a shield rather than a tool. Beatrice Holloway followed, pale as alabaster, her eyes swollen from weeping, her hands trembling. The servants moved about nervously, placing platters of food upon the sideboards, but touching nothing on the table until Poirot's inspection. He examined every dish, every bottle, sniffing, swirling, measuring. At last, satisfied, he seated himself midway down the table, so that his eyes might watch all. When the meal began, it was with an air of strained civility. Silver clinked, glasses chimed faintly. Conversation was scarce. Clara attempted once or twice to speak, but her voice faltered under the weight of silence. Edmund muttered about politics, about the price of tobacco, but no one answered him. Charles cleared his throat, then thought better of words. Beatrice barely touched her food. Poirot himself ate sparingly, though he studied the company with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws. Each gesture, each hesitation, each glance across the table was etched into his memory. At last, the moment arrived. Graves the butler entered with a single bottle of wine, dark and dusty. Poirot rose, intercepting him. "Permit me, mon ami," he said, taking the bottle into his hands. He turned it gently, inspecting the cork, the neck, the glass. His sharp eyes found nothing amiss. With his own pocket knife, he cut the foil, drew the cork with care, and poured a measure into his glass. He sipped, smacked his lips, nodded. Bon, safe. You see, tonight there will be no confession. A tremor of unease rippled around the table. Charles shifted in his seat, wiping sweat from his forehead. Edmund drummed his fingers against the table impatiently. Clara clutched her handkerchief so tightly that the lace tore. Beatrice sat rigid, her eyes fixed upon her untouched glass. Poirot sat slowly, folding his hands. He did not speak again. The silence thickened, heavy with unspoken dread. And then it happened. Edmund Vale, restless and irritated, seized the wine bottle and poured himself a second glass, but his hand shook as he set it down, and a drop spilled onto the cloth. He muttered an oath, reached for a napkin, and in that moment Poirot saw it. A flicker of panic in his eyes. A glance not at his own glass, but at Clara's. Poirot's voice cut the silence. "Ah, monsieur, you betray yourself." Edmund froze. The others turned sharply toward him. Poirot rose, his finger pointing, not accusing but precise. "When you poured just now, your concern was not your own glass, but that of Mademoiselle Clara. You feared it. Why? Because you tampered with it, n'est-ce pas? Just as you tampered with Lady Agatha's." Edmund's face darkened. "That is absurd." "Non, monsieur. It is truth. The poison was never in the bottle. It was in the glass. Lady Agatha's glass. And last night you attempted the same upon Mademoiselle Holloway, when she searched the library, when you struck with the knife. But you failed. Tonight you tried again, with Clara. The panic in your eyes betrays you." Gasps erupted. Clara recoiled in horror. "Edmund, no." Poirot pressed forward, relentless. "Your debts, they were too great. Lady Agatha would never give her blessing. She wrote a letter exposing you, perhaps even disinheriting Clara if she wed you. You could not allow it. You poisoned the widow's glass. You sought to destroy the letter. You tried to silence Beatrice. And now you sought to ensure Clara herself could not speak against you." Edmund shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. His face was flushed crimson. Clara, trembling, whispered through tears, "How could you? How could you? Edmund glared at Poirot with venom. You think you've won, but you're wrong. Without that letter, you cannot prove a thing. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but there you err. For last night, while you sought to destroy, I sought to preserve. The letter is safe. It lies now in my pocket. He drew it forth, folded and sealed with Lady Agatha's crest. It names you, Sir Edmund Vale, as the one who betrayed her trust. And now, your own actions have confirmed it. A stunned silence followed. Clara buried her face in her hands. Beatrice sobbed openly. Charles sagged in relief. Poirot tucked the letter back into his coat. It is finished. Lady Agatha's voice, though silenced, speaks still. Justice is served. Outside, the storm broke at last, rain lashing the windows with fury. But within, the tempest of suspicion was ended. The murderer was unmasked. Poirot, adjusting his cuffs with immaculate precision, regarded the subdued company with quiet gravity. Mes amis, remember this. Murder is born not of opportunity but of fear, and fear leaves always its mark. The little gray cells, they see it, they understand it, they reveal it. Thus, Hercule Poirot has spoken. He bowed his head briefly, as though to the absent Lady Agatha, and then resumed his seat with the calm of a man who has merely solved a puzzle, though the lives of many had hung upon its answer. Chapter 10. The Final Curtain. The fire in Lady Whitcomb's drawing room crackled with sharp, brittle snaps, as though even the flames were anxious to witness the outcome of Hercule Poirot's investigation. The great detective, immaculate as ever, stood with his back to the hearth, the faint glow of the embers gilding his neatly waxed mustache. Around him, the suspects gathered in uneasy silence, each face pale, each heart thrumming with dread. The storm that had battered the countryside for the past 2 nights had Enjoy. Poirot raised a single finger, silencing him. No, monsieur. From the air? No. From the facts. Always from the facts. Allow me to place them before you. He stepped forward, hands folded neatly behind his back, and began to pace slowly, deliberately, his voice carrying the rhythmic weight of undeniable logic. The sequence of clues. First, the poison itself, Poirot said. Digitalis. Subtle, bitter, masked in surgulus tonic. Not a substance readily at hand. Yet, Lady Whitcomb kept a small store for her roses, did she not? Her eyes widened. For the pests, yes, but never for. Poirot inclined his head gently. I do not accuse you, madame. Not yet. But the source is established. Now, who had the knowledge to prepare it? The colonel with his military experience. Certainly, but he lacked access. Mademoiselle Harcourt, who studied herb lore. Yes, she possessed the knowledge, but not the opportunity. Edward Marsham, who prowled the study and handled surgulus glass more than once. The possibility exists. But let us not forget the maid, Alice, whose duty it was to bring the drinks to the master's hand. Alice started, her cheeks burning red. Poirot's eyes lingered on her only a moment before turning back to the room. And then, there is motive. Sir Giles was not a man beloved. His will, the fortune it represented, cast a long shadow over you all. Colonel Hargreaves faced ruin if his investments failed. Lady Whitcomb feared the loss of her freedom, bound as she was to a domineering husband. Mademoiselle Harcourt nursed a bitter wound of the heart, abandoned for wealth. Edward Marsham sought money for his extravagant vices, and even Alice bore resentment for years of cruel treatment. Each motive strong, each capable of spurring the hand. He paused. Silence descended. The ticking of the grandfather clock grew thunderous in the stillness. Yet, only one person fits the puzzle entire. Let us examine the night of the fatal supper. Sir John tamper with the decanter days before the fateful evening, and you alone had the knowledge to mask your act in tenderness. Tears brimmed in Lady Whitcomb's eyes. I swear to you, Poirot, I endured cruelty, humiliation, endless torment at his hands. But murder? That is not. Poirot's eyes softened for but a moment. Madam, I understand suffering, but the facts, they remain. He lifted a small object from the side table, a tiny porcelain vial, delicate, painted with faded roses. Gasps rose again. Found concealed within your writing desk, madam. And within it, residue of digitalis. Lady Whitcomb swayed, her face pale as parchment. Clara Harcourt reached forward as if to steady her, but Poirot's voice cut through the tension once more. Yet, there is more. For one might still argue that this vial was planted, a false clue. So we must consider the psychology, the human element. Sir Giles was a tyrant, yes, but he was also a coward at heart. And you, madame, you learned the art of patience. What is poison but patience distilled? No violent confrontation, no risk of exposure, only a steady hand, and the certainty that time would accomplish what you desired. Lady Whitcomb collapsed into the chair, sobbing softly. The revelation, Poirot's voice lowered, grave, deliberate. But the truth is more terrible still. For, though you mixed the draught, though you prepared the vial, you did not pour it that night. No. Another hand delivered the glass that carried death to Sir Giles. All eyes snapped to Alice. The maid shrank beneath their gaze. Poirot's finger lifted, precise as a conductor's baton. Yes, Alice, you knew. You had seen Madame prepare the tonic, had glimpsed the hidden vial. For weeks you endured Sir Giles' cruelty, and at last you made your choice. You poured from the poisoned decanter, knowing full well what it would do. In your heart you thought, let him suffer, as I have suffered. Heed. Poison is never the answer. For even when the victim is hateful, the act stains the soul. You will live with that stain, always. Colonel Hargreaves, shaken, muttered, By heaven, Poirot, you've uncovered a tragedy fit for the stage. Oui, Poirot murmured softly. A tragedy indeed. But remember, murder is not solved by theatrics, only by the little gray cells. He turned toward the window. Dawn had begun to creep across the horizon, a pale light breaking the darkness. Poirot's gaze lingered there, as though searching for something beyond human justice. Behind him the widow wept quietly. The maid knelt trembling, and the others sat in stunned silence. The case of Sir Giles Whitcomb was ended, but the shadow it cast would linger in every heart present, a reminder of what desperation and poison could accomplish. Poirot, however, straightened his cuffs, his mustache gleaming in the growing light. The curtain had fallen, the case was closed, and Hercule Poirot walked once more into the day, undaunted, unbroken, his mind already turning to mysteries yet to come.